It's now my pleasure to hand over to Julian David, techUK CEO, who is going to lead the next session with Sarah Cardell, who is Chief Executive of the Communication and Markets Authority. So Julian and Sarah, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anthony. And see, we switched mic technology. We're going to do this with handhelds and with the lectern. So look, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Sarah, Chief Executive of Competitions and Markets Authority, as Anthony said. You're going to give us some expertise gathered in 11 years at the regulator, 2 of which, obviously, as the Chief Exec, Sarah. So that's really interesting. And those 2 years, I think, have probably seen more change, perhaps, than the previous 9. But again, you can tell us about that. But also, you're going to cover the new government and some of the things they're saying about how they want regulators to also be focuses and drivers of innovation, as well as the other duties they have. And of course, I was absolutely delighted that one of the things you've done there is to actually name something, Growth and Investment Council, and invite me, among others, to join that on behalf of the tech industry. So really grateful you're joining us today. I know you're going to have a specific focus on digital in what you talk about, and then I'm really pleased that you agreed to come and have a few questions and discussions with me afterwards. So Sarah, please do come and take the stand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julian, for a very kind invitation. I must confess, I hadn't actually realised when I accepted the invitation to come and speak today, excuse me, that actually the techUK turned 10, I think just within a few months of the CMA's own 10th anniversary that we celebrated last year. And as the CMA, we thought a lot about what this milestone meant for the CMA, how much our operating environment had changed over the decade, how much we need to change with it, but also stay true to the fundamentals of our work to promote competition and to protect consumers. Now, we've been progressing that change very rapidly over recent months, and I'll talk more about that shortly. But I do just want to say at the outset that my understanding of techUK's mission at the beginning of its second decade, to make the UK the best place for technology companies to locate and thrive, that is very much a mission, actually, that the CMA shares as well. So what does the landscape look like for the CMA today? What's changed and where are we headed? Well, the eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed that the CMA has been in the news just once or twice recently, not just in the daily course of our announcements, but also as part of a really important wider conversation about the role of competition in growth. Now, I know that the power of effective competition is something that techUK members live and breathe. We hear directly from you how critical it is for your businesses that opportunities exist to enter and scale in open and competitive markets. And I want to leave you in no doubt, excuse me, that the CMA is committed to this goal. I'm just going to grab a glass of water so I don't croak my way. So I want to leave you in no doubt that the CMA is committed to that opportunity to enter, to grow, to scale in open and competitive markets. These markets, your markets, they're the lifeblood of the UK tech sector, but they're also foundational to the success of the whole of the UK economy. And I know that we will all continue to work highly collaboratively together to help realise the enormous opportunities that they represent for our country. So over the last 6 months, I've been speaking to a wide range of businesses and investors to better understand how the CMA can maximise our contribution to the growth of the economy that we all want to see in the tech sector and across the whole economy. And I've heard that while our commitment to promoting competition is, of course, critical, it's not enough. How we go about our work in practice matters a great deal, particularly to business and investor confidence in the UK's regulatory environment. Now, some of you may by now be familiar with what I've termed the 4 Ps framework. I set this out for the first time before Christmas, and it's a framework really to upgrade the way that the CMA works. It's based directly on the very helpful feedback that we've had from many businesses and representative bodies, including techUK. And it's based on 4 key principles: pace, predictability, proportionality, and process, by which I really mean our direct engagement with businesses. Now, in practice, the 4 Ps mean some really quite fundamental changes to the way that we go about our work, which I'm confident will enhance business and investor confidence in the UK's competition and consumer protection regimes, and will enhance the attractiveness of the UK as a destination for capital. Now, I've spoken quite a bit recently about applying that 4 Ps framework to our mergers work, and actually there's more to come on that later this week, so do look out for more announcements there. But today I'd like to use this opportunity to talk about how we're applying that 4 Ps framework to our new digital markets competition regime, including what this might mean for the CMA's approach to our first strategic market status investigations, SMS designation investigations, which we launched in relation to both search and mobile ecosystems back in January. Now, many of your businesses will also provide products and services directly to consumers, and you may be aware that the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act, which brought in the new digital competition regime, also introduced a new consumer protection regime, which will be enforced by the CMA and will come into force from April this year. So at the end of this speech, I also want to preview some of our thinking in that area too, including responding to some of the concerns that have been raised with us, including on behalf of techUK members. Now, before I come to the 4 Ps, I'd like to offer a few reflections on the government's draft strategic steer to the CMA, which was published last month, including how it affects our work in digital markets. Our purpose, our statutory mandate to promote competition and protect consumers, that hasn't changed. Those fundamentals remain front and centre of the draft steer, but they are firmly and clearly situated within the government's #1 priority focus on driving growth and investment. And that steer provides helpful clarity to guide the CMA as we independently carry out our statutory functions. So there are 5 key points that I think it's worth highlighting this morning. First, where we do have discretion, we've got a clear steer now on what to prioritise, but also how we design our interventions, in each case having a really strong focus on driving growth and investment in the UK. And that includes supporting growth and international competitiveness in the 8 key sectors that have been identified in the government's industrial strategy. Second, prioritising action where there is a clear and direct impact in the UK, and thinking carefully about when and how we engage in global issues. And I'll come back to this because obviously many of the issues that we look at in digital markets are clearly global by nature. Third, within the UK, working with relevant regulators to ensure regulatory action is coherent, timely, and supports growth and investment. And again, from a digital perspective, the CMA's role in the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum is obviously a critical one. Fourth, using the new digital markets competition regime flexibly, proportionately, and collaboratively to unlock opportunities for growth across the UK tech sector and the economy more broadly. And finally, using our new direct consumer enforcement powers under the DMCCA to help grow the economy by promoting consumer trust and confidence whilst deterring poor corporate practices. Now, underpinning all of this and directly aligned to my 4 Ps framework is a steer for the CMA to discharge its functions in a way that really helps drive growth and builds investor and business confidence. So how will the CMA apply that 4 Ps framework and respond to the strategic steer when it comes to our new digital markets competition regime? I believe this regime creates a unique opportunity to deliver benefits for companies of all shapes and sizes across the UK tech ecosystem and the wider economy. Opportunities for the very largest firms to continue investing and innovating in a stable, predictable, and proportionate regulatory environment, but also opportunities for new entrants, disruptors, investors, entrepreneurs, startups, and scale-ups, many of whom UK-based, many of whom represented here today in this room, to innovate and thrive. It will deliver greater access to data, key functionality, more interoperability, fair terms, and more choice. But how we operate this regime, that will be critical to its success, and to ensuring that it carries the confidence of businesses and investors both here in the UK but also internationally. Now, unlike our merger review powers with the digital markets regime, we're starting with a blank canvas. Or perhaps it might be more accurate to say we're starting with a canvas on which I believe the 4 Ps have already been sketched, and to which we can add colour and texture now as we implement the new regime. Because this is a regime in which the best-in-class features of regulation are already baked in. So I want to give you a flavour of our proposed approach, both in terms of how the 4 Ps are already reflected and how we'll go further in applying them and taking account of the strategic steer. And I should flag now that in April we'll be publishing a short document which will set this out more fully. So starting with pace. Perhaps more than in any other part of our economy, it's essential that our work in digital markets is developed and implemented at a pace that keeps up with market dynamics. That's essential to avoid creating protracted uncertainty and to avoid chilling investment and innovation. Now, the legislation already imposes tight statutory time limits and a broader statutory duty of expedition. But in practice, we want to move through our work as quickly as possible. For example, now with our current designation investigations, we're already thinking about potential interventions alongside carrying out those designation investigations. But we are mindful that pace must be balanced against engagement and effectiveness, especially with a new regime. Now, delivering effectively at pace means streamlining our approach to investigations, focusing as quickly as possible on key areas of potential concern, rapidly standing down lines of inquiry where no clear evidence of concern arises, prioritising those issues where we are clear that we can deliver positive outcomes for the UK, avoiding gold plating, requesting only salient information, and keeping our decisions as short and clear as possible. Now, at the outset of our 2 live SMS designation investigations, we published so-called invitations to comment. Those were very intentionally and necessarily broad in scope, to be refined by the evidence and responses that we received, and we're now in the process of doing that focusing exercise. As we move through those investigations, you should expect to see clear, explicit streamlining and prioritisation in our approach. Next, predictability. Now, the evolution of next-generation technologies, that may be predictable, but the regulatory environment should not be. Certainly not if we want to sustain high levels of investment and innovation. Now, I believe one of the strengths and distinguishing features of the UK digital markets competition regime is the targeted and bespoke nature of that regime. There are no default designations and no broad brush rules. This does have many advantages, but one potential downside is the risk of uncertainty about whether a firm will be designated in the first place, and if it is, which rules will apply. Now, we've had understandable feedback from businesses and investors asking for greater certainty about how the regime will apply in practice. As with PACE, some clarity is already provided in the legislation. So for a firm to be considered for SMS designation, it has to have UK turnover of over £1 billion or global turnover of over £25 billion. Substantial and entrenched market power in a digital activity is required and a position of strategic significance. So in practice, only a handful of firms will fall within scope for designation. And of course, designation isn't automatic. It follows an evidence-led investigation with decisions grounded in an in-depth understanding of the realities of the industry. The legislation also provides a limiting framework for the design of any conduct requirements that we introduce. They can only be implemented in pursuit of 3 broad objectives: fair trading, open choices, and trust and transparency. And they must be one of 13 permitted types. But we're also creating greater predictability through published guidance, extensive engagement and consultation, and transparent timelines. Today, I'm announcing a further step. I want to take this further by incorporating a new step into our SMS designation investigations, an initial roadmap for possible future interventions if the firm were to be designated with SMS. Now, we'll publish that roadmap when we consult on a proposed designation decision, and that will provide clarity which issues are likely to be prioritised for early intervention, which issues will be deprioritised, and which issues will be kept under consideration. For our current SMS investigations, we intend to publish those roadmaps alongside our consultations on the proposed designation decisions in June for search and July for mobile. We want to provide greater predictability and also greater transparency for stakeholders about which issues to engage with us on at any particular point in time. Consultation proposals on the interventions themselves that we do prioritise for early action will then follow alongside any final decision on designation, currently expected to be around October this year. Next up is proportionality. To spur investment and innovation across digital markets, any regulatory intervention must be proportionate. And that principle of proportionality, that's already baked into the heart of the UK's digital markets competition regime. As I've just explained, and unlike some other jurisdictions, there's no automatic process for designation, and there are no automatic regulatory requirements. But proportionality also underpins our choices about which issues to tackle and which interventions to select. In other words, our prioritisation approach. Excuse me. So the following considerations are key, and they directly connect to the government's strategic steer. First, impact. We will prioritise those interventions which have a clear and direct impact for UK consumers and UK businesses. Second, strategic significance, including prioritising those interventions which strongly support business investment and economic growth in line with the strategic steer. And third, we'll give careful consideration to whether the CMA is best placed to act. Reflecting the steer, we'll consider the interplay with other regulators. Having a very croaky moment. So third, whether the CMA is best placed to act. Reflecting the steer, we'll consider the interplay with other regulators, both domestically and internationally. Now, when it comes to global issues, and that was a point I flagged at the outset, in relation to the new digital markets competition regime, we're less likely to act where there's action by another agency that already effectively addresses any UK concerns. We see that in the steer, avoiding unnecessary duplication. Now, where there is a clear case for UK-specific action, we will be looking for an effective and a proportionate solution that best delivers for the UK. Now, in some cases, it may make sense to replicate an effective outcome that we see in another jurisdiction but hasn't been applied in the UK, and we can transpose that across to the UK environment. But we'll also work with designated firms and other stakeholders to understand whether there are opportunities to take advantage of a bespoke and proportionate approach for the UK that delivers a really positive and effective outcome that is tailored to generate the best possible outcomes for UK businesses, UK consumers, and the UK economy. Now, of course, we'll look at these issues in the round. And as you'd expect, we also need to carefully consider the risk levels involved in any intervention and also whether we have adequate resources available to deliver those impactful outcomes at pace. Now, that includes ensuring that we have the right expertise and deep understanding of the markets that we're looking at. And at the CMA, we've been investing in this capability for several years, particularly through the growth of our new Data, Technology and Insights Directorate. But we're also building out, and I'm really excited about this, we're building out a new business and strategic analytical capability to deepen our understanding of firm strategies and business models. We want to bring the perspective of businesses and investors directly into our work. We believe that is vital to create the best conditions for innovation, investment, and growth. So just as you see lawyers and economists, increasingly our data, tech, insights capability, I want to have that business and analytical capability baked into the way that the CMA is working. Our final area is process. As I said, that's really about direct engagement with businesses. The new digital markets competition regime will only deliver on its enormous potential to support growth and investment across the UK economy if we all, the CMA and the many innovative, ambitious businesses represented here today, if we can work together constructively and collaboratively. That's why the regime was designed from the outset to be highly participative based on deep engagement with diverse stakeholders. And in practice, this means wide-ranging consultation, inclusive engagement every step of the way. And some of you in this room, I'm sure, are already well involved in that. But again, we're challenging ourselves to make sure this engagement really works for businesses and investors. We will put in place a regular and defined program of engagement, a go-to-you approach, where the CMA proactively makes that connection in a way that's quick, easy, and informal for businesses of every size, large and small. We're engaging already with our members of the Growth and Investment Council, Julian mentioned that, and we want to bring that engagement into our SMS investigations so that we can hear key industry and expert perspectives. We're also continuing to strengthen ties with trade associations, UK-based VC and private equity firms, with the UK startups and scale-ups that are primary beneficiaries of our work in this space. And we'll be engaging more with large UK-listed companies, even outside the tech sector, who may benefit from our work in digital markets. Now, as Julian said, techUK is, of course, a very valued member of our Growth and Investment Council and represents thousands of diverse member organisations. So I hope you will all take away today what I've said about our willingness to engage with open minds and an open door. I wanted to close with a few words on the new consumer enforcement regime. Now, I know that many of you are B2C businesses and keen to understand about how we're approaching our refreshed mandate when it comes to consumer protection. The new powers come into force in April, and they offer an opportunity, and I think this is really well put, actually, in the strategic steer, to grow the economy by promoting consumer trust and confidence whilst deterring poor corporate practices. Because consumers deserve to know that the CMA has their back. And fair-dealing businesses deserve to know that their competitors are playing by the same rules and can't gain a competitive advantage by breaking the law. Now, these new direct consumer enforcement powers mean that the CMA will be able to decide whether consumer protection laws have been breached without having to take those cases to court, and will be able to take direct action to tackle those breaches, including through fines and consumer redress. At the beginning of April, alongside the final guidance for that regime, we'll be publishing an approach document. This will include detail of our enforcement priorities for the first 12 months of the regime, and we'll have a clear focus on the most egregious harms. So today I'd just like to preview a few of those plans. In recent months, we've consulted extensively on our guidance for the new regime, and we've had very broad and helpful constructive feedback from a range of stakeholders, including techUK. Now, we have heard loud and clear that businesses, large and small, want to do the right thing for consumers, and many are working hard to ensure that they comply with the new rules. But for smaller businesses especially, the compliance burden must be proportionate. So taking that feedback on board, we'll be streamlining the drafting of our guidance on unfair commercial practices. We want to make it as clear and as accessible as possible for business, whilst retaining, for example, the case studies and the examples that we know many of you have found helpful. And we'll be publishing that final guidance in April. I want to touch on two areas where we received particular feedback, including from techUK. The first relates to drip pricing. Now, this is actually where we had the most substantial feedback on our consultation, and we're carefully reflecting on that feedback as we finalise our position. So I'm announcing today that we're going to take a phased approach to the guidance on drip pricing. In April, we'll be providing a clear framework for complying with the parts of the law which are already well understood and largely unchanged. And by this, I mean prohibition of genuinely unexpected and untrailed mandatory charges that are added on at the end of a purchasing journey. Those dripped fees that harm consumers and fair-dealing businesses by hindering effective price competition, which we know primarily happens on headline prices. But for those aspects of the drip pricing guidance that have created more uncertainty, for example, around fixed-term periodic contracts, we're going to be running a further consultation over the summer on a revised set of guidance with a view to producing finalised guidance in the autumn. And in the meantime, clearly, we will only take enforcement action against drip pricing, which is clearly in breach of the rules in line with the guidance that we're publishing in April. The second area I just want to touch on briefly is fake reviews. Now, this is a banned practice under the new legislation, and although we can tackle fake reviews already under our existing powers, you might have seen, for example, some undertakings that we recently agreed with Google on that, we do recognise that the new provisions may require changes in systems and compliance programmes. And we've heard you that businesses need time to bed these in. So for the first 3 months of the new regime, we'll be focusing on supporting businesses and their compliance efforts rather than enforcement against these rules. Now, the remaining law, where our new direct enforcement powers can be used, hasn't really changed materially, but we do recognise that the risks of getting it wrong are changing substantially. Businesses have told us that they're preparing to comply and will be relying on the clarity provided by our final guidance published in April. Reflecting on that, more broadly, our early enforcement action is likely to focus on the most egregious breaches of consumer law. For example, aggressive sales practices that prey on vulnerable consumers, providing information to consumers that's objectively false, contract terms that are obviously imbalanced and unfair. And at the same time as tackling that egregious conduct, we want to support the vast majority of well-intentioned businesses who want to do the right thing, but may be unclear on exactly what is needed to ensure compliance, especially in areas where the law has been updated. So when considering the appropriate level for any penalty, we'll also be taking into account where businesses have taken proactive steps to correct infringing conduct. Now, I'm confident that this approach will deliver robust protection for consumers, which focuses on clearly illegal conduct that results in tangible harms, but at the same time gives businesses the clarity that they need to comply as quickly as possible and the confidence that our early enforcement action will be proportionate. That is, after all, in the interests of both businesses and consumers, because when businesses get it right, consumers benefit. I want to finish by just broadening the lens for a moment to the wider work the CMA does to support growth and investment in UK digital and tech markets. In particular, we're supporting the government on its industrial strategy and the rollout of the AI Opportunities Action Plan, whether it's through removing barriers to competition and scaling in priority sectors identified by the industrial strategy, unlocking opportunities for new and diverse players in cross-economy areas like procurement and smart data, or facilitating legitimate collaboration between businesses to achieve a step change in productivity and innovation. The CMA is committed to playing its part. Now, I know techUK and its members will provide incredibly valuable insights and collaboration as we work together through the rest of this year, and I'm very much looking forward to that and continue the conversation now. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Sarah. If you'd like to come and grab a seat, I'll make a bit of space for us, and there's a mic for you there. So, look, that's a real tour de force. There's lots of content there. And I just wonder, a few thoughts that we could explore together. First thing I would say, you mentioned 10 years of techUK, 10 years CMA. One of the changes that I've seen, and I would date it actually, very close to when you were appointed, maybe you have a view on this, is as CEO, as engagement has gone up a gear. I mean, we used to have formal meetings from time to time with the previous team at CMA, and that really has changed up a lot. I think you and I have had something like 4 conversations in the past 3 months, one of which obviously was the council. So, I do think it's very interesting, and one of the things that's obviously driving that is the fact that you have more focus now on digital, but also something you said at the Growth and Investment Council, which was having a sector view of this, and I just wonder if you want to touch a little bit on that. And I think we linked it also to the industrial strategy in the conversation in the council, didn't we?
Yeah, thank you very much. I should try and avoid any more croaks. Sorry about that. Strepsils obviously didn't work. Oh, good. So, I mean, you're right, and it was a real priority for me, actually, at the point at which I moved from being General Counsel to CEO. It was one of the things that I was very clear we needed to achieve a real step change in that engagement. And that, is critical because we have a huge responsibility as a CMA to make sure that we really, really understand the markets that we are looking at. We should tread very carefully before we take any action to intervene in markets without a very deep understanding of the dynamics of those markets. And there is no better way to get that than to speak directly to the businesses who are involved in those markets day to day. It's your bread and butter. It's what you do every day. So I've really driven that program over the last couple of years. I think we've gone up another level, probably, over the last few months for a number of reasons. So you mentioned the Growth and Investment Council. That's been a really important initiative, actually, from my perspective, because we've done a lot of engagement that's been bilateral. So we've had a lot of conversations with different businesses in different sectors, different representative groups. But this was really the first time that we were able to bring all of those different voices together. So we've got techUK, we've got CBI, we've got FSB, we've got Startup Coalition, Founders Forum, Scale Up Institute, BRC, you name it, pretty much. We've got everybody in one room. And I wasn't really sure how that conversation would go for the first meeting, but actually what was really striking to me was the commonality of the themes that came through. So we talked a lot about the ways of working, the CMA, a lot of those themes I've mentioned in the speech today, the 4 Ps. We talked about that international dimension. How does the UK regulatory environment impact on businesses and investors who are looking at the UK from a global perspective? We talked about getting that balance between protecting consumers, but also making sure that businesses are operating in a predictable environment. And we talked about how we could really harness the work of the CMA to support the industrial strategy. And that's where this sector focus, I think, is really interesting, because we can drill down and we can look at, whether it's some of those cross-cutting themes like procurement, which I think is a theme that comes up in every conversation I have with stakeholders. Great opportunity, I think, to harness really effective competition, large and small players, new entrants, scaling up opportunities. The opportunity to do some of that drilling down, but also some of those cross-cutting themes. So it's something I'm pretty passionate about, as you can probably tell, because I think the CMA needs to be absolutely grounded at the heart of the markets that we're looking at.
And I think being on the council with those other bodies, and you mentioned it again in your speech, tech is everywhere these days. Digital is everywhere. We used to talk about the economy and the digital economy. Well, there's just the economy really now, isn't there? Because everything is going to be digital, and you hear that a lot from the government with all the announcements. And I think one of the things that came out of this, which I'm sure you're going to see in the council, is there was a request, could we have a lot more detail on what interaction should you have with businesses? And I distinctly remember one of the attendees saying, we need to have an awful lot more detail. At the same time, somebody else saying, what we really need is a simple guidance to put out there. Now, that's going to be an interesting challenge to manage. Or do they both work? Is there a hierarchy of this that, in terms of predictability, here's the things we're really looking at in this industry sector, and now here's the detail?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's got to operate on a number of different levels, I think. So, the guidance example is actually maybe a good one, which came up also in the council discussion we had, where I think we were, let's say, complimented for a 100-page piece of guidance, which was very comprehensive in nature, but isn't, frankly, necessarily that accessible for businesses who don't have a lot of time to actually really get to the chase of what do I need to do to comply here. So we're working much harder at making sure that we have guidance that is really clear and accessible for businesses, that actually helps you day to day in going about your business and not being too distracted by the compliance efforts. But we're also looking at, so something I've mentioned already, we're going to be publishing imminently, actually, our mergers charter for business. So that's going to be like a 3-page, a really short document, which just tells every business who's engaging in the merger control process, here's how you need to go about engaging, here are the priorities, what's going to make it the most sort of efficient, effective process for you, what do we as the CMA need? A lot of this is also about trying to facilitate more direct engagement between the CMA and businesses, and I can say this as a former advisory lawyer for many years before I joined the CMA, and the legal advisory profession is a great profession that has a very important role to play, but actually there are times when there is no substitute for the CMA being able to sit down sort of face-to-face with the businesses in question and have those conversations directly, and the more of that direct engagement that we can encourage and support and facilitate, the better. Obviously, we recognise that may be easier for larger firms and smaller firms, and organisations like techUK are incredibly important for us to be able to bring in that representative voice for the many smaller businesses. But that direct engagement is critical.
And among the things you said in your speech again, that balance with focusing on consumers, focusing on fair practice, but also allowing things that are new and different, and getting that innovation going for business. One of the things you talked about, and I made a note of this, was you've got new powers, but it's particularly something about trust, building trust. Now, this is a theme that techUK has been on for a number of years. We have our own Digital Ethics Summit, which came out of the concept many years ago that said legislation isn't enough. Businesses have also got to have a philosophical approach to this, an ethical approach. And I think, you said we had a shared interest. I do think trust is something businesses appreciate, but obviously they need to sort of see that balance between innovation and protection.
I think this is such an interesting theme, and personally, I think I've been on a bit of a journey about that balance. So, you think about consumer protection, and we think about the real responsibility that we have as the CMA to stand up for consumers and protect consumers from that real egregious conduct. But at the same time, I'm really, really conscious that the work that we do, or the possibility of enforcement action, that can cast a really broad and uncertain regulatory shadow. And we need to take that very seriously. And I really like the way it's framed in the draft strategic steer, which is consumer protection being about building consumer trust and confidence in markets, because that benefits businesses as much as it benefits consumers. So that's the sweet spot, I think, that we should be striving for, absolutely protecting consumers, making sure that consumers feel confident, that they feel able to go out and engage, and nowhere is that more important than in relation to digital markets, online online shopping. That's critical, because you can win or lose consumer trust. I think we've all seen that very, very, very fast. So I think that's important. It's important for the economy. It's important for growth. And so I think the mutual interest that we have in building that consumer and business confidence in the regime, so that everybody is able to move forward in a positive space, call out the bad conduct, but really, really support compliance, support trust. Our enforcement action will be a success if we have to do less of it.
Well, and they say, don't they, it's a cliche, but it's true. It takes a long time to build trust and very short time to lose it. So I think businesses are very interested in that. The other thing, I'd just like a couple of other things just to explore with you, and I'm frantically looking around to find out when we're supposed to finish this session, because I know there was talk of a coffee break, and I've also heard maybe there isn't one. So, Anthony, your caffeination idea is possibly dying a death, but still we'll see. But two things I did want to ask is, you're doing a transformation here, aren't you? And you talk about, logging that in the 4 Ps. And I think everybody looks at those and says, yes, they look like, really interesting things. But when you look at a transformation, Sarah, just between us, some of this stuff is already part of the DNA of the authority, the agency. Which of the 4 Ps do you think is the most transformative for your team? What's the one, is it pace? Because you've got to be careful. Or is it, proportionality? Because we can't let even a minor thing go, because of that risk balance of the past, which the government's trying to change.
It's a really good question, and I could give you a very legal answer and say, of course, it's a combination of all of them, and they're all interlinked, and one without the other doesn't work, which I happen to think is true. If I was allowed to call out 2, if you would give, I do think all 4 are important.
They're all 4 important. It's just.
I think the sort of, where will people look in a couple of years' time and think, gosh, that felt really different? I think the process, the business engagement, I do want to deliver a step change, and I think that is a hugely positive opportunity, and something that I think we can make quite unique to the way that the UK regime works. And then I think on predictability, that is so key to business and investor confidence. And when we look at the challenges facing the UK economy and the opportunities for growth, it's so important that we get that right. So I would probably call out those 2, even though I think they're all important.
And I think that's really interesting, because I'm told we've got a bit more time, but people keep kind of whispering in my ear saying, stopping now, going longer. But that's the dynamic nature.
It's predictable. Agility is also important, I think, I've found.
So, and I do think the understanding and the focus on both sides looking at it from a sector point of view, as you've said you're going to do, and tying that also, in the industrial strategy, tech is both a foundation industry, but it's also an enabler. And that was clearly recognised by you and the team in the call. And that then tells you, as long as we keep giving you the right input, what pace means for this sector versus what it might mean for hospitality or some other sector. And I think also it does mean, well, what are the predictability things? And what's the time, what's the horizon of predictability in this sector?
And I think the other thing that's quite interesting just in that theme is, and we chatted a bit about this when we spoke last week, but we did some work last year, our State of Competition, which sounds very grand, but State of Competition report, with various findings about the UK economy, but one of those was about tech diffusion and adoption and some of the challenges there. And so, although a lot of our focus on digital markets work tends to be on the sort of very obvious digital markets, we're looking at search, we're looking at mobile ecosystems, actually I think another area where there's a great opportunity to partner and collaborate is at looking at what are those blockers or obstacles or opportunities to improve tech diffusion and adoption across the economy. Are there particular sectors, are there particular enablers that we need to identify? And I think there's a huge opportunity there for us to work together.
And really important when you think about that in the context of what the government's trying to do in the growth agenda, because adoption of tech is often the place that the UK, we're great at developing it, inventing it, developing it, designing it. Adopting it is sometimes a bit of a challenge. So I do think that's a really interesting perspective. And then taking perhaps an international view of this, the tech sector is nothing if it's not international. Even the smallest company's got to have a global view, to both because of the opportunity, but also the challenge of people coming from elsewhere. And again, that was mentioned a lot. I know you do meet with other competition authorities, and you did talk about the idea of trying to make sure you know what's going on these big topics that you're looking at. I mean, how exactly do you think that's going to unfold? And can you touch a little bit about the reputational stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously critical. It's clearly, if you're doing any work in digital markets, tech markets, then sort of inevitably there's a strong global dimension to that. So we have very, very strong working relationships across all sorts of agencies globally, whether that's in the US, whether that's the EU. There's a lot of great work coming out of the likes of Japan, South Korea, Australia. There's a whole host of different jurisdictions looking very closely at developments in digital markets, and it's very useful for us to be able to join up and compare notes, and even looking at the way different jurisdictions are developing slightly different regimes, which, by the way, I think does give us another real opportunity in the UK with the UK's regime to actually provide a bit of a showcase that others can perhaps learn from and adopt as well. So we work very closely, we look at those trends. We also obviously work very closely to understand, coming back to understanding of the markets, the actual trends at a global level. I think as we are going forward with this approach and the 4Ps approach and reflecting on the strategic steer, it's certainly sharpening my focus and thinking about making sure that whilst we understand, fully appreciate that global picture, we then drill down in a really laser-focused way to where we can act to support UK businesses and the UK economy. And that's that critical differentiator. We need to do it fully understanding the global context, but that doesn't mean that we need to be the ones fixing every single global issue. We can look and be much more selective, and I think we should be, in identifying which are the areas where we're best placed at to deliver real benefit for the many UK businesses who are looking to innovate and thrive and compete in the tech ecosystems here in the UK. And where should we be, as I said in my speech, where should we be, frankly, leaving an issue alone because it's been well addressed by others internationally? Where can we learn from others? Where is there a real opportunity? And I do think that the UK regime gives us a real opportunity to take a more targeted, a more bespoke, proportionate approach on some issues that drive a benefit for the UK. So it's a more nuanced approach. We obviously need to do that in a way that's sufficiently predictable. But it is a more nuanced approach, and I think it's one that creates a real opportunity for the UK. And that's something that I think is very much in line with the strategic steer, and I think is genuinely something that I feel very positive about. Again, what will help us make those choices comes back to the engagement. It's about hearing from businesses, investors, from the ecosystem directly, because we can't make those choices in a vacuum. We will only know the best choices to make if we've got the right inputs coming into that.
Well, I think one of the things I would say is that CMA and other regulators in the UK already have a pretty good reputation. And I think perhaps one thing for you to consider is even, being more visible. I certainly think if I take your innovation, investment and growth as your sort of mission statement around the world and looking at investors and companies wanting to come here, they're going to want to hear that. And you saw an example of that at Mobile World Congress recently where the CEO of Vodafone and the CEO of Orange were both discussing something and highlighting the fact that the UK has approved what has been staring the telecom sector across Europe in the face for some time, which is mergers can promote competition. So I do think that message is good. And we've done a survey which has been referenced here and launched here, which shows that businesses actually think the UK is a good place to work. The one thing they do say from time to time, Sarah, is, but could we get more coordination among the regulators? And you mentioned duplication, avoiding duplication. Do you want to just finish maybe by touching a little bit on how you and your peers, and we've got two of them coming up in a session very shortly, how do you see the opportunity to coordinate a bit better, maybe, to avoid that duplication, even in timing sometimes?
Yeah. I'm just very briefly picking up on your previous point. I mean, I do think in terms of the attractiveness of the UK, that regulatory environment piece on an international front, that is so important, and that's a real priority for us. And again, I think that we can help to create markets in the UK which are open, are competitive, draw those opportunities for businesses to innovate and compete and thrive, but also draw in that global capital. And that's, again, is critical to the growth piece. On coordination, in the UK, we've got the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum. So the 4 CEOs, myself as CEO of the CMA, but also Ofcom, FCA, and the Information Commissioner's Office, we all meet regularly. Our teams meet regularly. We have a program of activity that we work on together where we're really looking at making sure that our action is as joined up as possible. It's partly about horizon scanning, sharing our understanding of issues coming down the track. Are they going to be competition issues? Are they going to be data protection issues? Are they going to be online safety issues? Where are those interfaces? Where are the blurry boundaries? Because, of course, there are blurry boundaries. What can we do to make those boundaries as clear as possible, or to work collaboratively together? Sometimes we can do joint work. But also, again, I think quite important that businesses see that activity and can see us as a joint group, that we can come, you can approach us, talk to us directly through DRCF as well as speaking to us individually. So it's quite interesting that DRCF initiative has now been kind of modelled in a number of other countries. And I think, again, we've sort of led the way there as the UK. And we clearly need to work hard at that going forward, because there are not right lines between the different responsibilities that we have as different regulators always.
Thank you. Look, I think the challenge also, and you've made it very clear you want us to respond to this challenge, is for business to engage and for business to help you and your team and the other regulators actually understand this a bit more. So I think I would like to close there by thanking you very much. I think it's been a very comprehensive tour de force, as I said, and thank you for your time, Sarah. Please join me in thanking Sarah.
Thank you.